3 days before my daughter's retirement celebration, I drove to Hartwell Florist on Elgin Street to confirm the centerpiece order. Margaret Hartwell, who had owned that shop for 37 years and arranged flowers for my own wedding back in 1986, met me at the door before I could even pull it open. Her face was wrong. That is the only way I can describe it. Margaret's face is normally the color of warm bread and full of quiet contentment. That afternoon it was gray, and her hands were gripping a pair of pruning shears she had no intention of using. "Eleanor," she said, not a greeting, a warning. I started to ask about the white dahlias. She shook her head once, sharp, and stepped back into the shop. I followed. She locked the front door, turned the sign to closed, and without saying another word, she led me through the workroom, past the cold storage, into a narrow hallway I had never noticed in all my years of ordering flowers from her. A small room at the end, a desk, 2 chairs, a dim overhead bulb. She closed the door behind us and turned it off. "Margaret, what on earth?" "Shh." She pressed 2 fingers to her lips. Her eyes were wet. "Just listen." The wall beside us was thin, pressed wood paneling, the kind from the 70s, and on the other side of it, voices, clear enough that I stopped breathing. My son-in-law's voice first. Daniel. Confident in the way men are when they believe no one is watching them. The accountant confirmed it this morning. Once the power of attorney is signed, we move within 72 hours. The TFSA and the RRSP transfer immediately. The condo is already listed under the numbered company. A second voice, younger, quieter. "My daughter, Sophie. And she won't question the documents?" "She'll be celebrating," Daniel said. "She'll sign anything we put in front of her. She trusts you." A third voice then, clipped and professional. A woman I didn't immediately recognize. "I've drafted the capacity assessment to reflect the consultations from March and April. Professionally, it's airtight. Once the designation goes through, no one can challenge the transfer." I stood in that dark room and felt the floor tilt. Capacity assessment. My daughter had been taking me to a specialist I thought was a regular wellness checkup, something Sophie had arranged as a gift for my retirement. I had sat in that office 3 times and answered questions about dates and numbers and word recall, and I had thought nothing of it because Sophie had told me it was standard at 62. "A baseline cognitive screen," she had said. "All the insurance providers want it now." Margaret's hand found mine in the dark. I had bitten down on the inside of my cheek so hard I could taste copper. The voices moved away. A door on the other side closed. Margaret turned on the light. Her eyes were red. "They were here last Tuesday," she whispered. Daniel booked the private room for a so-called business lunch. Same conversation, nearly word for word. "I didn't know if I should," she stopped. "You've been coming to this shop for 40 years, Eleanor. I couldn't stay quiet." I looked at her. "My flowers," I said. "The white dahlias. Are they confirmed for Saturday?" She blinked. "Yes." "Good." I picked up my handbag from where I'd set it on the desk. "Thank you, Margaret." "Eleanor, what are you going to do?" I looked at this woman who had known me since I was a 26-year-old teacher, buying tulips every Friday because I couldn't afford anything else, who had stayed open late the night my husband James died so she could bring flowers to the house herself and not make me wait. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I'll be all right." I walked out into the May afternoon. Elgin Street was bright and ordinary. A cyclist rang his bell at a dog crossing the path. 2 teenagers were eating poutine on a bench outside the restaurant next door. I crossed to my car, unlocked it, and sat down. I did not start the engine. I thought about the third voice. The woman. Professional. A capacity assessment. I turned the phrase over in my mind, the way you press your tongue against a sore tooth. I had been so careful at those appointments. I had been sharp. I had answered every question correctly. Whatever she had written, it was a lie. The question was, what kind of lie, and who had paid for it? I drove home to our house in the Glebe. The Victorian semi-detached James and I had bought in 1994 when the neighborhood was still affordable, and Sophie was 3 years old and used to run through the hallway in her socks sliding on the hardwood. I sat in the kitchen and did not make tea. I thought about what I knew. James had died 11 years ago. A stroke, sudden, 59 years old. He had been an architect, careful with money, proud of what we had built. The house was paid off. The TFSA held $460,000. The RRSP held $310,000. The condo on Dalhousie Street, a two-bedroom I had purchased 4 years ago as a rental property and income supplement for retirement, was worth approximately $680,000 at current market. Total, just under $1.5 million. Everything James and I had saved in 31 years of a quiet, careful life. That was what they were moving in 72 hours. I opened my laptop and searched. Capacity assessment. Power of attorney Ontario elder financial abuse. The results made me feel physically cold. It happened more often than anyone talked about. Families who believed they were protecting their elderly parents. Professionals who provided documentation that was difficult to challenge. People who had done nothing wrong except trust the people closest to them. I closed the laptop. I picked up my phone and called Diane Cho. Diane had been my solicitor for 14 years. Corporate law, wills, property transactions. She had drafted James's will and the condo purchase agreement and my own updated will 2 years ago. When I told her I needed to see her tonight, she did not ask questions. She said, "I'll be in my office until 9. Come now." Diane's office is on Bank Street, above a dry cleaner. She met me at the door looking exactly as she always looks. Small, precise, and paying complete attention. I showed her the notes I had typed into my phone in the car. She read them twice. "Tell me about the assessment," she said. I described the appointments. Dr. Renata Gallo, a private clinic on Maryvale Road. Sophie had made the referral and had come with me each time and had waited in the reception area. She had always been warm, attentive, asking me how it had gone. I had told her I felt great. She had squeezed my hand. Diane pulled up the clinic on her laptop. She typed for a moment, then turned the screen toward me. Dr. Gallo is a registered occupational therapist, not a neurologist. Her clinic specializes in capacity assessments for estate planning purposes. She paused. That's legal. But it also means she is very specifically in the business of providing documentation for legal and financial transitions. Is it real? The assessment? It depends what she wrote. If she documented decline that didn't exist, it's fraud. If she documented borderline performance and used professional judgment to recommend oversight, it's harder to challenge. She looked at me steadily. "Eleanor, do you have any reason to believe your cognition has actually declined?" "None." "Then we get an independent assessment. Tonight I file a notice of objection with the Office of the Public Guardian and Trustee. That freezes any power of attorney activation pending review. But I need to move quickly. What's the timeline you overheard?" 72 hours from this morning." She nodded and was already reaching for her phone. "There's someone else you need to speak to. He's done this kind of work for 15 years. She wrote a name on a notepad, Patrick Okafor. He's RCMP retired, Financial Crimes Unit. If Daniel has been moving money or creating corporate structures, Patrick will find it. I took the paper. Can we trust him? I've used him on 3 cases. He's thorough, he's fast, and he keeps his findings for court." I stood. "Thank you, Diane." She walked me to the door. "Eleanor, if this goes where I think it might go, you'll need to decide how far you want to take it. Your daughter—" "I know." I stepped into the stairwell. "I'll call you in the morning." I sat in my car on Bank Street and looked at Patrick Okafor's name and number. 11 years since James died. 11 years I had managed this household, this income, this retirement fund, entirely alone. Sophie had been so supportive through all of it, attentive, present. She had driven me to appointments, called every Sunday, been at the house for Christmas and Thanksgiving and the occasional Tuesday when she came for dinner and we watched British murder mysteries together on the couch. I had thought I was one of the lucky ones. A mother whose daughter remained close. Daniel had arrived 4 years ago. They had met through mutual friends. He was charming, interested in everything, good at listening. He had an import consulting business, he said. I had never entirely understood what he imported or consulted about, but Sophie seemed happy, and by the time I had any questions about his finances or his background, she was already engaged. I dialed the number. 2 rings. "Okafor. My name is Eleanor Marsh," I said. "Diane Cho gave me your number. I need to hire you tonight." Patrick Okafor arrived at my kitchen table at 8:30 with a canvas messenger bag and no recorder. He was 60, broad-shouldered, with reading glasses he kept taking on and off as he wrote. He listened to everything without interrupting. When I finished, he sat quietly for a moment, then said, "The numbered company. Do you have any details?" "Only that the condo is listed under it." "That's enough to start." He flipped to a fresh page. "The capacity assessor. Dr. Gallo on Maryvale." "Yes, I know that clinic." He said it without expression. "I want to pull the corporate registry tonight. Ontario Business Registry is public. If Daniel has incorporated anything in the last 2 years, it'll be there." "What are you looking for?" "3 things," he said, "and I'll be direct with you. Each one could be worse than the last." He looked at me over his glasses. "How much do you actually know about your son-in-law's business?" "Not enough," I said. "I realize that now." He nodded once. "I'll need 16 hours. Tomorrow evening, your place, your solicitor present." He left at 9:15. I stood in the kitchen in the quiet and thought about Sophie. 33 years old. Brilliant. Genuinely brilliant. The kind of organized intelligence I had recognized in her since she was 6 and alphabetized her own bookshelves. She had her father's eyes, and my stubbornness, and a career in healthcare administration that she had built entirely on her own merits. Had she known? Had she been manipulated? Both? I could not answer that. Not yet. I did not sleep. I lay on top of the covers in my clothes and watched the ceiling lighten from black to gray to the pale yellow of a May morning in Ottawa. At 6, I heard the mourning doves on the back fence, the ones that came every spring. James used to say they sounded like questions. At 7:40 the next morning, Patrick texted, "Found the numbered company. 1, 4, 2, 3, 8, way, 2 140, 9, 7 Ontario Incorporated. Incorporated 11 months ago. You need to see this." He arrived at my house at 7 the following evening with Diane already seated at the table. He opened the canvas bag and laid out 3 folders. "Start with this one," he said. The first folder held the corporate registry documents for 1, 4, 2, 3, 8, 9, 7, Ontario Incorporated Sole Director, Daniel Brennan Ford. Registered address, a mailbox service on Spark Street. Incorporated 11 months ago, 3 months after Sophie and I had our first conversation about retirement planning, the one where Sophie had gently suggested that it might be worth looking at a trust structure. I had said I'd think about it. She had dropped it. Or I had thought she'd dropped it. "This company has no operating history," Patrick said. "No HST registration, no payroll, no contracts filed. It was incorporated for one purpose." He opened the second folder, a printout of land registry records. The condo on Dalhousie Street had been listed for private sale 11 days ago. Asking price, $640,000. The listing agent was a brokerage I didn't recognize. There was an accepted offer. Conditional period ending in 4 days. "He listed my condo," I said. "Without your knowledge or consent," Diane said. "Which means whoever is representing this transaction either didn't verify ownership properly or..." She stopped. "Or they did and they're part of it," I said. Patrick nodded. "The third folder is the one that took me the most time." He opened it. A printed email thread, 5 messages, between Daniel Ford and a financial advisor named Craig Bellamy, associated with a private wealth management firm I had never heard of, registered in Alberta. The thread discussed, in the kind of language that sounds clinical until you understand what it means, the liquidation of registered accounts following a capacity designation. The phrase used was orderly wind down of the client's legacy portfolio. My name appeared twice. My SIN number appeared once, in a message where Daniel referred to it as the file identifier. I sat back in my chair. "Craig Bellamy," Patrick said, "is the subject of a complaint currently with IIROC, now CIRO, from a family in Calgary. Same structure. Elderly woman. Capacity documentation. Registered account transfer. Numbered company. That case is ongoing." "He's done this before," I said. Daniel may not have known about the Calgary case when he made contact, but Bellamy has done this before, yes. Patrick folded his hands on the table. "Here's what concerns me most. Daniel has no visible income from his consulting business. I pulled his company's filings. There are none of significance. But he has a lease on a property in Westboro worth $3,000 a month, 2 car payments, and he paid cash for a trip to Portugal last autumn. He paused. He needed money. And he built this structure carefully and over time, which tells me he is methodical. And my daughter? I asked. Patrick and Diane exchanged a look. It was Diane who answered. She signed the referral forms for Dr. Gallo. She accompanied you to all 3 appointments. Her name is on the preliminary capacity file as the referring family contact. She was gentle about it, the way you are gentle with a fact that causes pain. That said, being named as a referring contact is not the same as understanding the legal use of the documentation. The question is what she was told, and what she chose to believe, I said quietly. Neither of them disagreed. The retirement celebration was Saturday evening. 60 guests at the NAC's 4th stage, the event Sophie had spent 4 months organizing. Colleagues from 30 years in education, former students, neighbors. My oldest friend Carol flying in from Halifax. I had been looking forward to it the way you look forward to things when you have earned them. Now it was something else. Diane spoke. The objection notice was acknowledged this morning by the OPGT. Any power of attorney activation is frozen pending their review. That buys us time on the financial instruments. The condo is more urgent. How urgent? The conditional period ends Tuesday. If we don't move before then, the sale proceeds to closing and extraction becomes very complicated. She paused. I can file an emergency injunction Thursday morning, freeze the transaction pending fraud investigation. But Eleanor, if we do that, the listing agent gets notified, Daniel gets notified, and the cover is gone. How long before the party if we file Thursday morning? 36 hours. Then he'll know, I said, and he'll either run or he'll change the approach. Yes. I thought about it carefully. I don't want him to change the approach, I said. I want everything on the table at once, all of it in one place, in front of people who matter. I want no room for a quiet private settlement that lets him walk away. I looked at Diane. Is there a way to time this so the injunction activates at the party? Diane was quiet for a long moment. It can be filed to activate at a specific time. Yes, if the judge approves an unusual order. I've done it once before. She looked at me steadily. You want to do what Catherine Morrison did at that wedding. I looked at her. Who? Never mind. It's a structure that works. She picked up her pen. Here's how. My daughter called Thursday morning while I was in the back garden pretending to read. She sounded bright, organized, the Sophie of every Sunday call. She asked if I'd decided on shoes for Saturday. She reminded me that Carol's flight arrived at 4. She told me she loved me and was so proud of how far I had come. There was nothing in her voice I could identify as guilt. I didn't know if that meant she didn't feel any or if she was simply very practiced at not showing it. I love you too, I said. I can't believe it's already here. You deserve every bit of it, Mom. I hung up and sat with the phone in my lap for a long time. My neighbor Ruth knocked on the back fence that afternoon to ask about the dahlias for Saturday. I told her they were confirmed. She said she was looking forward to hearing my speech. 30 years in the classroom, she said, shaking her head admiringly. James would have been so proud. That sentence landed somewhere deep and unhelpful. I thanked her and went inside. At 5:30, Patrick sent a message. Dr. Gallo's clinic lost its Ontario Association of Occupational Therapists certification in 2022. She still has her professional license, but the clinic itself was flagged for documentation irregularities in an unrelated matter. Not enough to revoke, but enough for our purposes. At 6, I called Carol in Halifax. Carol and I have been friends since Teachers College in 1983. She knew James before I did. She has been through every difficulty of my adult life with the same reliable Carol quality. She does not flinch, she does not catastrophize, and she does not waste time being sympathetic when there is work to do. I told her everything. She was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. What do you need me to do Saturday? Just be there, I said. And when I start to say something that sounds like it isn't a retirement speech, don't react. Eleanor, she said. I have waited 30 years to watch you be ruthless. I wouldn't miss this for anything. Saturday came in warm and clear, the kind of May evening that makes Ottawa look like a city that planned to be beautiful. I dressed carefully. The navy dress I had bought in October, before any of this, A single pearl necklace James had given me for our 20th anniversary. My hair, which has been silver since I was 54, and which I stopped apologizing for at 55. Sophie arrived at the house at 4 to ride to the venue with me. She looked lovely and a little tired. Daniel was already at the NAC coordinating setup. She held my hands in the front hall and looked at me with real warmth and said, "This is your night, Mum. Everything is perfect." I thought, not yet, but it will be. The fourth stage was filled with the right kind of noise by 7:30. Former colleagues from 3 different schools, including 3 students who were now teachers themselves. My department head from the last 12 years, Gerald, who cried at every retirement party and was not embarrassed about it, Ruth from next door, Carol, who had arrived from Halifax and pressed my hand when I walked in and said nothing at all, which was exactly correct. Daniel was charming throughout dinner. He refilled wine glasses. He told the table a story about Sophie and me that was warm and specific and made everyone laugh. He looked at me with the face of a man who has no reason to be nervous. I smiled back with the face of a woman who has given him no reason to think she does either. At 8:40, Patrick arrived. He was dressed as he had been told to dress, which is to say like a retired civil servant attending a retirement party, which is exactly what most people would assume he was. He stopped at the back of the room near the AV station that Diane's assistant had quietly arranged access to at 7. At 8:55, the MC, a former vice principal who had known me since 2001, stood and cleared his throat. And now, to mark 30 years of teaching and a career that shaped a truly extraordinary number of young people in this city, I'd like to invite Eleanor Marsh to say a few words. I stood. I buttoned my jacket. I walked to the small podium at the front of the room and looked out at 60 people who had known me in one capacity or another for most of my adult life, and I felt, for one breath, the weight of what I was about to do. To my daughter who was sitting at the head table with tears already in her eyes because she was proud of me. To Daniel, who was smiling pleasantly. To all of these people who had come here for something uncomplicated. Then I thought about the condo on Dalhousie Street, and my RRSP and my SIN number typed into an email as a file identifier, and the weight lifted. "Thank you," I said. "I want to start by saying that standing here tonight, I am genuinely grateful. For 30 years in the classroom. For colleagues who became friends, for students who became remarkable people, for this city, which is terrible in February and spectacular in May. Laughter, the right kind. I want to tell you something James used to say." I paused. "James, let them think of him. He used to say that the most important thing you can do for someone is pay attention to them, not manage them, not plan for them, just pay attention." I looked at the room. I have been paying attention this week. The tone shifted. People felt it the way you feel. A room changed temperature. I have spent this week discovering that someone I trusted has been building a structure designed to take everything James and I saved in 31 years, and that the structure was nearly complete. The room went quiet. Sophie's face had gone still. Daniel's pleasant expression had not changed, and the fact that it hadn't told me something important about him. "I want to be clear about one thing before I continue," I said. "This is not a moment of anger. I am not doing this because I want to cause harm. I am doing this because 2 weeks ago Margaret Hartwell, who has arranged flowers in this city for nearly 4 decades and has known me since I was young and broke and buying tulips on a teacher's salary, pulled me into a back room and asked me to listen. And what I heard changed everything. I looked at the room. Margaret is here tonight." Near the back, Margaret raised her hand briefly. Several people turned to look. Her face was composed and absolutely certain. I nodded. "Thank you." I looked at Patrick. He pressed a button on the laptop. A screen behind me lowered. A corporate registry document appeared. 1423897, Ontario Incorporated Director, Daniel Brennan Ford. Incorporated 11 months ago. "This company," I said, "was created to receive the proceeds of a condo on Dalhousie Street that I own. That condo has been listed for private sale without my knowledge or consent, with an accepted offer currently in conditional period." I turned to the screen. "The listing has been injuncted as of 8 o'clock this evening." A murmur moved through the room. Daniel's pleasant expression had now become a different expression. Not quite panic. Calculation. A capacity assessment was arranged for me, beginning in March of this year. I was told it was a wellness baseline recommended by insurance providers. I turned back to the audience. It is not that. It is documentation intended to declare me legally incapable of managing my own finances, which would have triggered an automatic transfer of power of attorney. 72 hours after that transfer, my registered accounts, my TFSA, and my RRSP, $460,000 and $310,000 respectively, would have moved into accounts controlled through that numbered company. Silence. Dr. Renata Gallo, who conducted those assessments, operates a clinic that was flagged for documentation irregularities by the Ontario Association of Occupational Therapists in 2022. I held up a folder. Her written assessment of my cognitive capacity is fabricated. I have a certified independent neuropsychological evaluation completed this past Wednesday by Dr. Terence Walsh at the Ottawa Hospital. His finding is that I show no indicators of cognitive decline. His report has been filed with the Office of the Public Guardian and Trustee. Someone near the front said, "Oh my God," quietly. I looked at the financial advisor page on the screen. Daniel connected with Craig Bellamy of Bellamy Private Wealth, registered in Alberta, who has been the subject of a CIRO complaint from a Calgary family for conducting an identical transfer scheme against an elderly woman in 2023. I let that sit. Craig Bellamy is not a guest tonight, but he will be speaking to regulators next week. I turned away from the screen. I need to say something about my daughter. The room held its breath. Sophie was sitting very still. Her hands were in her lap. Her eyes were dry now, which told me she was managing herself the way she always managed herself in difficult situations, the way I had taught her to do. Sophie signed paperwork she was told was routine estate planning. She made referrals she was told were standard wellness procedures. She was told, over a period of months, that I was showing signs of difficulty, that I needed protecting, that the most loving thing she could do was help manage the transition before I made a mistake. I looked at my daughter. I know she was told those things because that is what Daniel told her, and because I know my daughter, and my daughter is not capable of looking me in the eye every Sunday and lying without a single crack showing. I paused. She was manipulated by someone who understood exactly how to use a daughter's love for her mother against both of them. Sophie's hands moved to her face. Sophie. My voice stayed steady, though I don't entirely know how. You are the thing I am most proud of in this world. And you are also going to have some very difficult conversations in the coming weeks, because love is not a defense against the consequences of choices, even when those choices were made from a compromised position. I am your mother. I will be beside you for all of it. The room was completely still. Daniel stood up. He said, "Eleanor." "Sit down, Daniel." He sat. Daniel Ford has been coordinating this structure since at least 11 months ago. The RCMP Financial Crimes Unit has been provided with the documentation Patrick Okafor compiled this week, including the email thread with Craig Bellamy, the corporate registry filings, the land transaction records, and the capacity documentation. I looked at Patrick. He nodded once. Those materials were submitted this afternoon. A woman I didn't immediately recognize stood near the door. She was in her mid-50s, in a gray blazer. She walked to where Daniel was sitting. She said something to him quietly. He shook his head. She showed him something, a document or identification, and he looked at it and then he sat very still and did not move again. Diane spoke from her seat at the front table. An emergency injunction filed this morning by Eleanor Marsh's solicitor, Diane Cho of Cho Legal, is now fully in effect. All financial instruments named in the documentation, including the registered accounts, the property on Dalhousie Street, and any accounts linked to 1423897 Ontario Incorporated, are frozen pending investigation. I looked out at the room. 60 people who had come to celebrate a retirement. Gerald was gripping the edge of the table. Ruth had her hand over her mouth. Carol, in the back row, was watching me with an expression I could not fully read, something between grief and fierce pride. "I want to say one more thing," I said. "And then I am going to have a piece of the cake that my daughter spent 3 weeks arguing with a bakery about, because it looks extraordinary and life is short." A few uncertain laughs. I spent 30 years teaching other people's children to think critically, to ask questions, to pay attention to what was happening around them. I failed to apply those lessons to my own household for the better part of 2 years. That is not entirely my fault, but it is something I will spend time with. I gripped the podium lightly. James used to say, "Pay attention." I wasn't paying enough of it. I am now. I turned off the microphone. Sophie did not collapse. That is one difference from what I had imagined. She stood up from the table and walked out of the room through the side exit, and Carol intercepted her in the corridor, and I did not follow. I let Carol do what Carol does best. The woman in the gray blazer had placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. He had not tried to move. Gerald came to me first. He held my hands and said nothing for a long moment. Then, 30 years. You never stopped. He meant it as a compliment about teaching. It applied, I thought, to everything. Some guests left quietly. The ones who stayed were the ones who had been in a room with me when something difficult happened before, and knew that the correct response was presence, not distance. Margaret came to me, and I held her for a long time and thanked her, and she cried a little and said she was sorry it had to be this way. I told her there wasn't another way that was better. At 11, Diane and Patrick and Carol and I sat in my kitchen, which is where all significant events in my life have ended up being processed. There was tea. There were the rest of the petite fours from the party that Carol had had the presence of mind to bring in a napkin. Patrick said the materials were with the RCMP. Craig Bellamy would be notified through Ciro. The condo transaction was stopped. The OPGT review would take several weeks, but the objection notice was solid. Diane said Sophie had not been charged, and in her opinion would not be. She's a witness, not a subject. And her cooperation, which I expect she'll give, will matter. Carol said nothing for a while and then said, "She called me in February, Sophie. She said she was worried about you, that you seemed tired. She looked at her tea. I told her you seemed fine to me, that you seemed exactly like yourself." She paused. He told her things and she believed them because she wanted to believe them, and because she'd been primed over 2 years to see what he needed her to see. "I know," I said. "She's still your daughter." "I know that too." I climbed the stairs at midnight, still in the navy dress. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at James's photograph on the nightstand. It is from 1991, a building site in the Glebe, him in a hard hat holding blueprints, squinting into the sun and laughing at something off camera. He always looked most like himself when he was working. "Still here," I said to him, "still standing." The summer was long. The investigation moved at the pace that investigations move, which is to say slowly and without narrative shape. Daniel was charged in July with fraud over $5,000, breach of trust, and conspiracy to commit financial fraud. Craig Bellamy was the subject of a joint RCMP and CIRO investigation that widened considerably once his files were opened. There were 4 other families. I did not follow the details closely. Diane kept me informed of what I needed to know. Sophie moved out of their shared apartment in June. She took very little. She told me later she didn't want things that had been in rooms where those conversations happened. She and I spoke on the phone first. Short calls in July, longer ones in August. In September, she drove from her new apartment in the Glebe, 3 streets from my house, and we sat in the kitchen, and she told me everything from the beginning. Not defensively, carefully, the way someone tells the truth when they have had months of therapy and are no longer afraid of what the truth makes them. She said Daniel had, over 2 years, told her I was slowing down, that I was making financial mistakes, that I had asked her something and then repeated it, that I had forgotten names. None of it true, but layered slowly and consistently, the way you change the color of a room by adding paint 1 thin coat at a time until the original color is gone and you can no longer remember what it was. She said she had wanted to be needed. Her whole life I had managed everything. After her father died, I had managed everything harder. She had felt useful for the first time when she was arranging my care, advocating for my well-being. She hadn't realized she was being handed a role that had been scripted in advance. She said, "I knew something felt wrong in April. I told Daniel I wasn't comfortable. He told me it was too late to back out, that you would find out I'd signed the clinic referrals, that you'd never forgive me." "He told you I'd never forgive you," I said, "to make sure you couldn't come to me." "Yes." She held her coffee cup with both hands. "I'm sorry, Mum, I know that's not sufficient. I'm just—" She stopped. "I'm so sorry." I looked at my daughter across the kitchen table, where we had eaten 10,000 meals together, where she had done homework and cried after breakups and brought home every report card and sat the morning after James died and not spoken for 3 hours. "I owe you something too," I said. "I became very efficient after your father died, efficient and self-sufficient, and very difficult to need anything from." I paused. "You stopped feeling like you had anything to offer me except being present. And I made that feel like it wasn't enough." I looked at her directly. "It was always enough. You were always enough. I was just not good at saying so." Sophie cried then, properly, the way she hadn't at the party. By December, Daniel had entered a guilty plea on 2 of the charges in exchange for cooperation on the Bellamy investigation. He received a conditional sentence and would face the full charges on the remaining counts the following spring. The condo was relisted at current market value. It sold in November for $710,000, which I invested in a GIC and did not touch. Dr. Gallo surrendered her professional license in October as part of a negotiated agreement with the OTAO. She did not face criminal charges. I thought about that for a long time and came to no satisfying conclusion about whether it was just, and decided that not every outcome is going to satisfy you, and the important thing is that she is no longer in a position to do what she did to me to someone else. 3 more families came forward once the case was reported in the Ottawa Citizen. An advocacy organization working on elder financial abuse legislation cited the case in a brief to the provincial government. I was asked if I would speak to them. I said yes. On the last Sunday of January, Sophie came for dinner. She brought a man named Andrew, a landscape architect, quiet and specific in the way James had been quiet and specific. He knew about everything, she had told me in advance. He was still there. We had roast chicken and talked for 3 hours. Andrew asked careful questions about the house and the garden and the plans for the oak tree at the back that had been threatening the fence for years. He did not ask about the trial or the money or any of it, which was exactly the right instinct. After dinner, Sophie and I stood in the kitchen washing up, the same way we had stood in that kitchen washing up since she was tall enough to reach the sink. She said, "I've been thinking about what you said in September, about being efficient. I think I spent 20 years being worried that I was inconvenient to you." She handed me a rinsed bowl. "I never was I?" "Never once," I said. "Not for a single day." She leaned her head briefly against my shoulder, the way she used to when she was small, and I stood there in my kitchen in January, with the sound of Andrew in the next room and the oak tree dark against the winter sky outside, and I thought about James, and about attention, and about the long work of loving people through the complicated middle distance between what you meant and what they heard. I thought about Margaret Hartwell and a locked door, and the courage it takes to involve yourself when it would be so much easier not to. I thought about 30 years of classrooms and a career that ended not with a quiet dinner but with a reckoning, and how that was, in its way, the most honest version of the ending I could have had. And I thought, pay attention. Every single day. Not just to the accounts and the documents and the things that can be taken, to the people. To the small ordinary moments that are the actual life, not the preparation for it. James was right about that. He was right about most things. I dried the bowl and put it away and stayed in that kitchen for as long as it lasted.